Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria by Winston S. Churchill. Today, 125 years ago, the future Prime Minister arrived in South Africa for his dangerous journey to the battlefields of the Boer War. We shall follow his footsteps as he narrates his adventures himself. Subscribe to our channel so as not to miss anything. Chapter 2, The State of the Game. Capetown, November 1st, 1899.
The long-drawn voyage came to an end at last. On the afternoon of October 30th, we sighted land, and looking westward, I perceived what looked like a dark wave of water breaking the smooth rim of the horizon. A short time developed the wave into the rocks and slopes of Robben Island, a barren spot inhabited by lepers, poisonous serpents, and dogs undergoing quarantine. Then with the darkness we entered Table Bay, and steaming slowly, reached the anchorage at 10 o'clock. Another hour of waiting followed until the tugboat obeyed the signal, but at last she ran alongside, and there stepped on board a man who knew. Others with dispatches pushed roughly through the crowd of soldiers, officers, passengers, and war correspondents to the general's cabin. We caught the man who knew, however, and setting him halfway up the ladder to the hurricane deck, required him forthwith to tell us of the war. Doubtless you have been well informed of all, or at any rate of much, that has passed. The man told his story quickly, with an odd quiver of excitement in his voice, and the audience, perhaps we were 300, listened breathless. Then for the first time we heard of Elandslaagte, of Glencoe, of Rietfontein, a tale of stubborn, well-fought fights with honor for both sides, triumph for neither. Tell us about the losses. Who are killed and wounded? We asked this wonderful man. I think he was a passage agent or something like that. So he told us, and among the group of officers gathered above him on the hurricane deck, I saw now one, now another, turn away and hurry out of the throng. A gentleman I had met on the voyage, Captain Weldon, asked questions. Do you know any names of killed in the Leicesters? The man reflected. He could not be sure. He thought there was an officer named Weldon killed. Oh, yes. He remembered there were 2 Weldons, one killed, one wounded, but he did not know which was in the Leicesters. Tell us about Mafeking, said someone else. Then we heard about Mafeking, the armored trains, the bombardment, the sorties, the dynamite wagons, all, in fact, that is yet known of what may become an historic defense. And how many Boers are killed? Cried a private soldier from the back. The man hesitated, but the desire to please was strong within him. More than 2,000, he said, and a fierce shout of joy answered him. The crowd of brown uniforms under the electric clusters broke up into loud-voiced groups. Some hastened to search for newspapers, some to repeat what they had heard to others. Only a few leaned against the bulwarks and looked long and silently towards the land, where the lights of Capetown, its streets, its quays, and its houses gleamed from the night like diamonds on black velvet. It is a long casualty list of officers of the best officers in the world. The brave and accomplished general of Glencoe, Colonel Chisholm, who brought the 9th Lancers out of action in Afghanistan, Shurston, who managed the Indian Polo Association, Haldane, Sir William Lockhart's brilliant aide-de-camp, Barnes, adjutant of the 4th Hussars, who played back of our team and went with me to Cuba, Brooke, who had tempted fortune more often than anyone else in the last 4 years, Chitral, Matabeland, Samana, Tira, Atbara, and Omdurman, and 50 others who are only names to me, but are dear and precious to many, all lying under the stony soil or filling the hospitals at Pietermaritzburg and Durban. 2,000 Boers killed. I wish I could believe there were. Next morning, Sir Redvers Buller landed in state. Sir F. Forestier Walker and his staff came to meet him. The ship was decked out in bunting from end to end. A guard of honor of the Duke of Edinburgh's volunteers lined the quay. A mounted escort attended the carriage. An enormous crowd gathered outside the docks. At 9 o'clock precisely, the general stepped onto the gangway. The crew and stokers of the Dunottar castle gave 3 hearty cheers. The cinematograph buzzed loudly. 40 cameras clicked. The guard presented arms, and the harbor batteries thundered the salute. Then the carriage drove briskly off into the town, through streets bright with waving flags and black with cheering people. So Sir Redvers Buller came back again to South Africa, the land where his first military reputation was made, where he won his Victoria Cross, the land which, let us pray, he will leave having successfully discharged the heavy task confided to him by the imperial government. Now, what is the situation which confronts the general and the army? I will adventure an explanation, though the picture of war moves very swiftly. In their dealing with the military republics which had become so formidable a power throughout the Cape, the ministers who were responsible for the security of our South African possessions were compelled to reckon with two volumes of public opinion, British and colonial. The colonial opinion was at its best, from our point of view, about 3 months ago. But the British opinion was still unformed. The delays and diplomatic disputes which have gradually roused the nation to a sense of its responsibilities and perils, and which were absolutely necessary if we were to embark on the struggle united, have had an opposite effect out here. The attempts to satisfy the conscientious public by giving the republics every possible opportunity to accept our terms, and the delays in the dispatch of troops, which were an expensive tribute to the argument, "Do not seek peace with a sword," have been misinterpreted in South Africa. The situation in the Cape Colony has become much graver. We have always been told of the wonderful loyalty of the Dutch. It is possible that had war broken out 3 months ago, that loyalty would have been demonstrated for all time. War after 3 months of hesitation, for such it was considered, has proved too severe a test, and it is no exaggeration to say that a considerable part of the colony trembles on the verge of rebellion. On such a state of public opinion, the effect of any important military reverse would be lamentable. Nor is the military position such as to exclude anxiety. The swift flame of war ran in a few days around the whole circle of the Republican frontiers. Far away to the north, there was a skirmish at Thule. On the west, Khama's territories are threatened with invasion. Mafeking is surrounded, isolated, and manfully defending itself against continual attack. Vryburg has been treacherously surrendered by its rebel inhabitants to the enemy. Kimberley offers a serene front to a hesitating attack, and even retaliates with armored trains and other enterprises. The southern frontier is armed and menaced, and the expectation of collision is strong. But it is on the eastern side that the Boers have concentrated their greatest energies. They have gone nap on Natal. The configuration of the country favors an invader. The reader has scarcely to look at the map, with which he is already familiar, to realize how strategically powerful the Boer position was and is. The long tongue of plain running up into the mountains could be entered from both sides. The communications of the advanced garrisons would be assailed, their retreat imperiled. The Boers seemed bound to clear northern Natal of the troops. If, on the other hand, they were, or should now be, suddenly driven back on their own country, they have only to retire up the tongue of plain, with their exposed front narrowing every mile between the mountains, and await their pursuers on the almost inexpugnable position of Laing's Neck. Appreciating all this, their leaders have wisely resolved to put forth their main strength against the force in Natal, and by crushing it, to rouse their sympathizers within the Cape Colony. Should they succeed either on this front or on any other to a serious extent, though the disaffection would not take a very violent form, for all the bravos have already joined the enemy, the general insecurity would demand the employment of an army corps in addition to that already on the seas. A democratic government cannot go to war unless the country is behind it, and until it has general support, must not place itself in a position whence, without fighting, there is no retreat. The difficulty of rallying public opinion in the face of the efforts of Mr. Morley, Mr. Courtney, Sir William Harcourt, and others have caused a most dangerous delay in the dispatch of reinforcements. War has been aggravated by the peace party, and thus these humanitarian gentlemen are personally, for they occupy no official position, responsible for the great loss of life. They will find their several consolations. Mr. Morley will rejoice that he has faithfully pursued Mr. Gladstone's policy in South Africa. Mr. Courtney that he has been consistent at all costs. Sir William Harcourt that he has hampered the government. But for those who lose their sons and brothers in a quarrel thus unnecessarily extended, there will only remain vain regrets, and to the eyewitness only a bitter anger. For the last 3 months, the imperial government has been in the unpleasant position of watching its adversaries grow continually stronger without being able to make adequate counter-preparations. But when once this initial disability has been stated, it must also be admitted that the course of the military operations has been, apart from their success or failure, very lucky. The Boers had the advantage of drawing first blood, and the destruction of the armored train near Mafeking was magnified by them, as by the sensational press in Great Britain, into a serious disaster. A very bad effect was produced in the undecided districts. It is perhaps wiser not to specify them at this moment. But a few days later, another armored train ran out from Kimberley, and its Maxim guns killed 5 Boers without any loss to the troops. The magnifying process was also applied to this incident with equal, though opposite, results. Then came the news of the Battle of Glencoe. The first accounts, which were very properly controlled, for we are at war with the pen as well as the sword, told only of the bravery of the troops, of the storming of the Boer position, and of the capture of prisoners. That the troops had suffered the heavier loss, that the Boers had retired to further positions in rear of the first, drawing their artillery with them, and that General Ewell had retreated by forced marches to Ladysmith after the victory, for tactical victory it undoubtedly was, leaked into Cape Colony very gradually, nor was it until a week later that it was known that the wounded had been left behind, and that the camp with all stores and baggage, except ammunition, had fallen into the enemy's hands. Before that happened, the news of Elandslaagte had arrived, and this brilliant action, which reflects no less credit on Generals French and Hamilton who fought it than on Sir George White who ordered it, dazzled all eyes, so that the sequel to Glencoe was unnoticed, or at any rate produced little effect on public opinion. The natal field force is now concentrated at Ladysmith and confronts in daily opposition the bulk of the Boer army. Though the numbers of the enemy are superior and their courage claims the respect of their professional antagonists, it is difficult to believe that any serious reverse can take place in that quarter, and meanwhile many thousand soldiers are on the seas. But the fact is now abundantly plain to those who are acquainted with the local conditions and with the Boer character, that a fierce, certainly bloody, possibly prolonged struggle lies before the army of South Africa. The telegrams, however, which we receive from Great Britain of the national feeling, of the by-election, of Lord Rosebery's speech, are full of encouragement and confidence. "At last," says the British colonist, as he shoulders his rifle and marches out to fight, no less bravely than any soldier, witness the casualty lists, for the ties which bind South Africa to the Empire. At last they have made up their minds at home.
This concludes today's reading of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria, by Winston S. Churchill. Join us also on November 5th for the subsequent chapter. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thanks for listening, and so long.